institute, we've been a powerful voice for participatory democracy. And every year, more than 15,000 students come through the doors that you did today to this exact replica of the United States Senate. We took Senator Manchin through here earlier today, and we had the same reaction that we always get from sitting senators. Their jaws drop and say, yep, that's right, you did it. There are a few things that are different. This is about 7 inches lower, and he noticed that too. So it's the real deal, and we're so proud of this. But when students come through here to be senators for a day, they practice the skills related to dialogue when you disagree with someone. They work with their fellow senators on passing bills related to climate change and immigration, and just literally minutes before you all came in, we had a group leave and working through an immigration bill. And then the other thing that this institute is increasingly focusing on is strengthening American democracy, and with a focus particularly on the US Senate, obviously. We convene regular Senate project debates with the Hatch Foundation and the Bipartisan Policy Center, which brings 2 sitting US senators together before a national audience to model constructive deliberation on issues of national importance. Secondly, we've been working on strengthening the US Senate itself, including through our Hyannisport summits, which we launched last summer with 10 former senators, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and we worked with the McCain Institute on that to really see where there might be rules and norms changes, and they're continuing that work to this day, and we're incredibly proud of that as well. And then finally, 2 weeks ago, I was in Kansas at the Dole Institute, where we launched a collaboration called Bolstering Elections, and it's an effort to promote investment in our country's elections administration, and you'll all be able to access that online starting next week. So it's with this mission in mind that we're hosting today's conversation. I think several of you know that before being a state senator here, I was based in the Middle East with the United Nations, involved in conflict negotiations in several locations. And it might be an unfortunate thing to say that the lessons I learned there are applicable in American politics today. Namely, you often undermine the ability to achieve your own goals when you merely dehumanize the other, or your opponents, and retreat into your own corners. And yet that is far too often in how we go about our policy debates and our politics in America today. So I know we all want to hear what our guest speaker has to say about this and more. And he has been at this, particularly because he has been at the center of so many of our critical national debates and negotiations. In West Virginia, Senator Joe Manchin has been a state legislator, Secretary of State, for 6 years, the governor, before joining the US Senate in 2010. I'm trying to think of what else he could have run for, but it's not easy. That's a lot. Last November, he did say that he was not going to run for re-election for the United States Senate, and we'll have them come in 1 minute. Senator Manchin will be in conversation with James Pindell, who is a political reporter for the Boston Globe. The Washington Post called him the insider's insider, because he was, I believe it's still the case, he was the only beat reporter to cover both the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary as a local, representing a local newspaper. For this conversation, it'll be important to note that he also covered the West Virginia State House for a newspaper there. So, what happens after that? They're going to have their fireside chat, then we're going to have a chance for everyone to engage through a question and answer period. And I'll just say that here at the Institute, we do want to include as many people as possible in conversations like this. So we'll ask you to keep your interventions brief in the form of a question and respectful to our guests and those who took the time of their day to participate with you today. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Senator Joe Manchin and James Pindell.
Second term out and I couldn't. So then I ran in that election in 2010. And when I came to the Senate, I thought, well, I've gone from the House of Delegates to the State Senate to Secretary of State to Governor. Now I must really be going to the big times, the big leagues. And I thought, well, if I can go to the Senate, I can really help a lot of people. I thought that. When I went to the Senate, I found out that not only did I not go to the big leagues, it was like the squabbling of the little leagues, which made it almost unbelievable to get anything done. And I was supposed to walk into and this is how the Senate works, this is how Washington works, and I will tell you all this. Washington is divided, and they want you to be divided. The country's not divided. Whether it's in Massachusetts, people have their own ideas, and that's fine. You ought to be able to have a civil discourse, be able to talk about it. And if you can talk about it, you can usually work the differences out. But if people don't want to sit down because they've already made up their mind, that's like, it is what it is. So in Washington right today, you go in, and the first thing in the Senate they tell you, if you have a D by your name or an R by your name, you're expected to have get on the phone and make fundraising calls every day. And the money that you raise, it goes in what we call a PAC. That money you put in your PAC is supposed to be used against any Republican, if you're a D, that's running for election. No matter, it might be your best friend. They could care less. If you're a Republican, you're supposed to be raising money to be against every Democrat. And I first heard that, and I said, I've never seen that before. I said, you go to work every day, and your coworker's trying to get you fired. And I'm trying to find a way to work with my coworker. So I tried to introduce pieces of legislation and said it'd be an ethical violation to campaign against a sitting colleague. Now, we're sitting here because of Ted Kennedy, and Ted Kennedy would always say, you know, the congeniality and the civility of the Senate was unlike any other body on earth. Everyone, it was unspoken, unwritten rules, so you didn't have to. The rule of civility, basically, these are our friends. We disagree, they're our friends. You heard about the Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan, and all the different conversations that went on. But today we're going to have to somehow govern ourselves because it doesn't work that way.
Another consequential person wasn't much in the news this week, Mitch McConnell. Announced his retirement as leader of the Republicans in the Senate.
The longest, for 17 years, the longest leader of the Republican Party, yeah.
What do you think his legacy is going to be?
I think an institutionalist. No matter what your differences may be, whether you like Mitch or not, the man truly protected the institution of the Senate. The filibuster was near and dear to him. You lose the filibuster, you lose democracy as we know it. And that was the Senate, the difference. There's never been a law written, there's never been a rule written, there's never been any language about the filibuster. The only thing the filibuster started was that the strength of the bicameral and the Senate was every senator can speak as long as they want. Well, once you run the timeout and the procedures there's different procedures on every bill. There's a 30-hour wait period of what we call curing, and you can waste 3, 4, 5 days on one bill and tie everything up. So in the filibuster, people said, no, we got to move on to something else. And if they could come make an agreement with you, then you get off your filibuster. That happened from the beginning of 1789 until 1917, World War I, trying to support our allies. And then they had to put the 67-vote rule in to put a stop to the filibuster. And then it went down to 60. So that's where we are. But Mitch McConnell was just truly a tactician and an institutionalist. And I think he'll go down in history as being one of the protectors of the Senate.
You know, someone made the comment the other day that the 3 biggest supporters of the filibuster in the Senate would probably be McConnell, Kyrsten Sinema, and yourself. 2 of you will be probably gone next year. McConnell's on his way out. What do you think the future is of the filibuster?
What scares me, I would think that basically anyone running for Senate or asking you for your support and vote, you ought to ask them, would you protect the filibuster? You always find something that you wish you could do with 51. So if you're in a majority of 51 Democrats or if you're in a majority of 51 Republicans, there'll be something very, very important and special to you and what your ideologue is and what your ideology is and people that support you and you really wanted to get it done. Voting rights is something that we really need to get done. And we were able to fix the Electoral Count Act. The Electoral Count Act was something no one thought we could do after January 2006. But we did it. Okay, January 6th, I'm saying. But we were able to do it. And we did it because we knew that that was a ceremonial job, the vice president counting. And we wanted to make sure that that's exactly, there would be no temptation to do what happened, the insurrection on January 6th.
You know, the counter argument is that it is minority rule. You've obviously tried to go even further with Voting Rights Act, with the John Lewis Act, filibustered. What do you say to the argument that it is minority rule and structurally benefiting Republicans who, you know, obviously represent more rural areas?
I know they're saying there's been so much done about suppressing. I was a Secretary of State, and that was in 2001 to 2005. During that period of time, I did everything I could to get more people participating. I thought it was a badge of honor to say we've got 60% participation or 70% participation. And every Secretary of State tried to outdo the other. We all tried to outdo each other. Can we get more people participating? I did early voting. I was the first in my state because people worked in the mines or in the factories, and sometimes on a Tuesday, they were working that shift, 12-hour shift or so. They didn't go vote, and they wanted to vote, so we said, well, fine. We gave them a week. I think we started a week, 7 or 10 days, and on Saturdays, and they gave them time, so we called it no excuse voting. You have no excuse not to vote.
That's nice flip. Since you're not running for re-election, not running for president, I'm hoping for the historical record here, I can ask you maybe a little more candid about a few things. What was your first thought the moment you knew the results of the 2020 election? Suddenly, Joe Manchin is the new president of the United States, according to Joe Biden. What were you thinking? You had a tremendous amount of power.
Well, you're talking about when the Senate went 50-50?
Yeah. I guess that's January, you're right. Yeah.
I never thought about that, but I can tell you the night before, Chuck Schumer's calling me every hour on the hour. The reason I don't have any power more. I'm one vote out of 100, so I'm 1%. My vote, my power is no different than the other 99. The only thing that separated me from most everybody else is that I never voted party line. I always said, if I can come home and explain it, I'll vote for it. If I can't explain it, I don't vote for it. And I'll never forget, Harry Reid came to me when I first got there in 2011, and he said, we're going to have a party line vote. I never heard the term. Now, mind you, I've been House of Delegates, State Senate, Secretary of State, Governor. Never heard the term party line vote. Never thought that way. I said, what does that mean, Harry? He says, we all have to vote for this, all Democrats. I said, really? We have to? He says, yeah, we're all together on this. I said, let me read the bill. I read the bill and I said, Harry, I'll be honest with you. On my best day, I can't sell this crap in West Virginia. I just can't do it. And he said, what? And I said, Harry, what do you mean? I said, Harry, you didn't elect me. I don't work for you. You can't fire me. And you're not my boss. Period. And I said, I'm not going to do it. And about for 3 months, they try to beat you down. They get enough pressure coming from everywhere. You just succumb and kind of fall in line. They found out they couldn't do that with me. And then they said, can you vote? Can you just tell me how you're going to vote? And I said, no problem. I'll tell you how and why to maybe make you think if you've done the right thing. And then it got to the point, can you just vote last? And I started laughing. I said, Harry, do you think anybody's going to follow me? Do you think? And he was afraid that would happen. It might give somebody else a little bit of courage to do what they thought was right. I've had fellow senators come up and say, boy, I wish we could vote like you. Now, do you know how we vote? If you're for something, it's this way. And if you're against something, it's this way. That's nothing electronic. That's it. I said, well, I think that if your thumb or your hand's working, you can vote like me. But for some reason, I didn't want to take the criticism.
How close did you get really to flipping parties?
Well, I would have been encouraged to flip parties. I said that if I flip parties, the Republicans aren't going to like me any better because I think a lot of things they're doing I don't like. I said, but I'm honest enough to be able to talk to them and find that middle to where they can have a little bit, go home and have a little bit of faith and save face. You know, my dad always said, or my grandfather would tell me, and come from old country, and he said, Joe, always remember, leave a little meat on the bone for the next dog. Leave a little meat on the bone I never forgot that. So everybody has to walk away with something. And then my dad tells me, if you got to say no, if you can say no with a tear in your eye, you'll be okay. They got to know it hurts you as much as to give them bad news or not be with them as someone who really wants you to do something. So I've used those principles in my life, and people pretty much know. So back to the power thing, I could not figure out why Chuck Schumer was calling me. He says, I think that we got a chance in Georgia. And I'm thinking, Raphael Warnock and John Ossel? I said, I'm not sure because, you know, a pretty red state. And then I think Raphael won first. I'm not sure which one. And Chuck got all excited. And then when the other shoe dropped and we had a 50-50, which made Chuck the majority leader, he called me and said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, we'll get some good stuff done. He said, Joe, what I'm saying is you could probably do anything you want to because no one can control you. I said, well, I'm not going to use that to hold people hostage. I'm just not going to do crazy things when I think you're doing crazy things. And so I never looked at it. I had all this power. And then which Joe's more powerful? Which Joe? You got the President of the United States. You know, and I've always been differential to who the president. And I've said this, when Donald Trump was president, I did everything in my power to do the best I could to help him. I didn't agree with him, but I wanted to help him. He's my president. And if you can speak truth to power, and think about this. You come from a little town in a coal mining community of 400 people. All of a sudden, you find yourself sitting in the Oval Office, you and the most powerful person in the free world, that has basically the military, one of the most unbelievable military at their fingertips, and you're going to sit there, and here's what they do. You're sitting there, give me your arm. They always do, no, give me this arm. Joe, your country needs you. They get this, it happens every time. When they want something, your country needs you. And I said, Mr. President, the country wants you too. That's the most respectful thing I could, because we're all in this together. And once you do that and you're honest with him, you can speak truth to power in a very respectful, sympathetic way, then you're okay. If you can't do that, then you got a problem.
A little different than the LBJ approach, I think.
LBJ was, and I've had leaders like that, and it takes that every now and then. I don't know.
So let's drill down a little bit on this.
Sure.
Can we just do, as an example, the Inflation Reduction Act, in terms of how the Senate works? You were obviously very intimately involved in it. It was about a 2-year process from when it began after the election. The Build Back Better, and then someone went on television, oh, that was you, and it basically killed the bill, and then resurrected it. Walk us through that.
It didn't resurrect. What happened? The BBB was first of all, coming out of COVID, we had $3.2 trillion that we put in the market. One way or another, we sent checks to everybody and this and that. We had $3.2 trillion. Mind you, we only basically generate about cash flow close to $5 trillion a year. And that's about $1 or $1.5 trillion less than what we need. So we've been deficit spending. We had a deficit for the last 21 years in a row. The country can't operate that way. You can't operate that way. No business operates that way. But yet we did. Never tried to balance it. Never thought about balancing the budget. And I'm saying this is off. This is wrong. So we put 3.2 trillion on top of the 5. Now you're at 8 trillion, okay? That's an awful lot to digest in a market that's been basically getting about 5 to 6 trillion ingested into it. Now they came back and we did the ARP, American Rescue Plan. That's where it really started. The president calls me because they had wind that I was against the ARP. I was against him putting it in reconciliation, which means the Senate then bypasses the 60 vote threshold. And Bob Byrd has always schooled me about this. He says, we have something called reconciliation to when it becomes the finances of our country, then we can go into reconciliation, and all you can do is deal with financial matters. And then he put what he called the bird bath, and he would wash it out. The bird bath would wash it out if they tried to do legislation, okay? So it goes through all this, and so they heard I was against it. I get called right to the White House. And I'd known Joe Biden for quite some time. He said, Joe, I need you to do, I said, Mr. President, I'm begging you, no, don't do this. I'm begging you as your friend not to do it. He'd already been programmed. I got to do it. Got to hit while the iron's hot. There's two things in politics you don't waste. You don't waste a crisis or a mandate. He didn't have a mandate. He barely got, okay, it was a very close election. So you should be walking on eggshells trying to get everybody back in to build a mandate. And I said, sir, I'm begging you not to, because I said, you were the only adult on the stage saying, I know how the place works, I can bring people together. Well, if you know how the place works and bring them together, then don't come out with pants on fire, and we're going to do right to reconciliation and shove it at the Republicans with 51 vote threshold. Don't do it. He kept saying, Joe, got to do it, got to do it, got to do it. I've always been differential to a new president, new governor, any new executive coming in. Give them a chance. They've earned that. And I said, sir, can I ask you one more time? Will you put it into the committees and let the committees go through the process? Give them 90 days maximum to come back with any legislation. If they don't, then use the hammer on them. Don't start out with the hammer. He was programmed. And I know it was a lot of, I'm sure they said, oh, we got to hit hard. So he did, and that's another 1.9. Now, the 3.2, 1.9, that's about 5.1 trillion that we had thrown at the market. We weren't digesting it real well. A lot of frauds going on. We didn't have to, you can't monitor all that money in different ways. So I'm thinking, oh boy, we're going to get ourselves some problems. And he said, Joe, get on the bill. I said, Mr. President, if you're asking me as my president, my friend, to get on the bill, you're first, I'll do it. So I did it. I said, I'm not going to be for everything. So we tried to make some changes. I said, but I'm never going to do it again. No sooner we did that, within 2 weeks, BBB. It was a $6 trillion bill if it was a penny, because there was so much in there, transformational as far as social reforms. And I'm thinking, man, I can't do this. And then we pulled the bipartisan infrastructure bill out of that. Okay, there was some good stuff in there. We pulled that out. But it was still a mammoth piece of legislation. And Bernie says, Joe, you know, this was $6 trillion. I've cut it down to $3.5 trillion. I said, Bernie, I can't be for this. This changes everything I've ever believed was not who we are as an American. It got down to the point for 8 months I got the living crap beat out of me. And what you just saw here was a smidgen of what happened in 8 months, people coming after me. I had to have security on all my children and grandchildren and all the threats, and it was just unbelievable. But after 8 months, I went in December of 2021. I said, sir, I can't get there. And I said, Mr. President, let me tell you something. You and I are the same vintage. You're a little older than me, but we remember, and I remember vividly, 13-year-old boy watching John Kennedy, 1960, give his inauguration speech. That's not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. I said, sir, if we pass this legislation, you will change the psychic of our nation to how much more can my country do for me? I said, Mr. President, I am sorry. You can put a gun to my head and pull the trigger. I can't do it. I wasn't raised that way. I don't believe that way. And there has to be a value of work ethic here that we don't just throw away. So he got very mad. He has a temper, hot temper. He got very mad, and I was upset. And I'll never forget him saying, he said, Joe, listen, we got an upset Italian senator and an upset Irish president. Maybe we'll let this cool off a little bit. I said, I think it's a good idea, Mr. President. So for 3 months, we didn't talk. Guess what happened? Ukraine war started. Let me just tell you about Ukraine war. We were told, and we have what we call the SCIF, which is a secured area we go into, way down under the Capitol. And they called us all into a meeting. And they says, within a very short period of time, two things could happen in the world. Russia's going to move on Ukraine, or you're going to have Taiwan being moved on by China. One of the two things will happen. And they told us almost about the times that they thought it would have. They hit Ukraine on the day, almost the hour. What they didn't figure out, they told us it'll last 2 weeks. They saw what happened with Crimea. Not a shot was fired in Crimea. So we went through all of that. And then I'm thinking, okay, that's not working out what they said. They could not calculate in our intelligence. And the reason our intelligence was not good, because we lost all human. We call it human intelligence. People that we have in the Russian government that's given us human. We lost that with COVID because Putin went into lockdown. So the people that we had that could get us information, we just weren't getting good information. And it happened. No one could understand. No one knew the psychic of Zelensky and the will of the people to fight for their freedoms and democracy. We'd been working with them since 2014. We weren't prepared for any of this, but we had them better prepared than what anyone realized. And then Putin weaponized energy. That's when I jumped in, and I'm chairman of the Energy Committee. So I told Schumer, I said, Chuck, you got serious problems. I said, forget about all this other stuff. I said, we don't have the energy to help our allies. And Putin's going to use that, and they're going to be looking for energy in all the wrong places. And if they do, it's going to be hard to keep our alliance together. So he says, well, your chairman wants you to write a bill. And I said, Chuck, if I write the bill, you won't like it because you believe that you can eliminate your way to a cleaner environment. I truly believe that you can only innovate your way with technology. You can't tell someone not to use something they have when you've used it before. You can't tell other countries. You can show them how to use it cleaner and better. And then we can invest in technology. So he says, well, why don't you write a bill? And I said, Chuck, if I write it, you're not going to like it. Now, another word was said. That was in March. So I have my committee, Energy Committee. There's 18 on the committee and myself. From March, April, May, and then by June, if you recall, inflation went to 9.1%. Gasoline was $5.01 average. And the president's polls were at
This is December of 2022. Yes, right.
23%. They called and said, you got anything? I said, sure, I got something. You won't like it, though. So they said, well, we got to have it. So we worked this bill, and we're producing more energy today than we ever have in the history of the United States of America, and you never heard the president say that. We produce more oil and gas, cleaner, and displaced more dirty fuel. You never heard about basically the ghost ships coming out of Iran, which no one said anything because they wanted the oil in the market, world market, to keep the prices of gasoline down, even though they didn't want to do it here in America. You never heard about us letting Venezuela back in. It has no oversight whatsoever on the environmental. None of that. We're displacing that. And then you had Russia displacing Russian oil too. So anyway, the people that was protesting today, and I respect that, what they don't understand, because of the bill that me and my staff wrote, we invested more in clean technology for the future energy of the world than has ever been done in the history of the world. We're now looking at to mature hydrogen, small modular reactors, geothermal, battery storage, all the things that we should be doing if you want less carbon. And with that, you can't force a sovereign country to do what they have laying in their backyard, so you can't use that. You can show them how to use it cleaner. And then you give them caveats to your economy that will give you caveats to trade with America if you use this technology. That's what I believe needs to be done, and we're trying to do it. We're in better shape today than we ever have been, but people are very upset because they don't want any more drilling, they don't want any pipelines, they don't want any of this. But you got to have it.
I want to ask you one more quick question, and then we're going to open up for a couple of questions from the audience.
That's how the IRA came about, the Inflation Reduction Act. It'll be the most transformative bill we've ever had.
One thing that's based on current events anyway, no labels. You decided to not run for president. They're apparently gathering somehow, virtually or something, next week, a week from today, to decide if they're going to go forward with putting together a ticket. Do you think they should, and who should run, if so?
I can only tell you my decision-making was this. All these people, no, they were my friends. I know them. They're the only venue I had when I got there in November 2010 that says, here's a group of your friends, Republicans and Democrats, you all can work on some problems together. That was the only entree I had, the only venue I had. I loved it because I had nowhere else to go to have that type of access to my Republican friends and Democrats who thought like I did. So with that being said, they took it a step further. First of all, you have very little choice. You've got a system that's basically a duopoly. You're going to have 10 million Democrats, 10 million Republicans vote in primaries will decide who you're going to, 150 million of us are going to vote. They're going to decide what you're going to have. And there's no challenge there to make sure. So they've gone the extremes, what you hear, the extremes that you saw in the room, that's the far extremes of the left and right. They're on both sides. And they suck all the oxygen, or they try to. No one's speaking for the 55% in the middle. They're trying to, but on this right now, if you're not on 50 states and 50 ballots, it's going to be difficult and challenging. I wouldn't take that risk, and I would never be a spoiler. If I'm going to be involved in the race, I want to win. But I want to have a fair opportunity and a fair chance to win. And it just didn't feel right for me, so I pulled myself out. And whatever they do, God bless them, I know their heart's in the right place. They need to take a hard look, and is it going to basically work as a spoiler?
But is it set up to be a spoiler in your opinion right now?
Well, right now, if you can't get on 50 states, and you're going to basically hit in some of the battleground states that could be very detrimental to what the outcome would be, yes.
Where is Sarah? Sarah's back here. There she is. She will be taking, if you have a question, please raise your hand. And at that point, when you get up there, please say your name, maybe use your affiliation.
I'm Marlene Kim. I'm an economics professor. I'm curious how we can get back to civil discourse.
Maybe I can come to your class, you can teach me a few more things. Civil discourse, it has to be. I don't know, it has to be demanded. It's not going to be demanded from the extremes. If the extremes, if the yin and the yang or the tail's wagging the dog, it's not going to change. If the middle says, let's say we're center, left, center, right, wherever you may be. If you finally say enough's enough, I'm not going that direction. I'm not going to vote for anyone that partakes in that. And if they're trying to normalize this type of behavior you saw today, this is not normal and it's not should be accepted. It's accepted from the standpoint we expect from the extremes. But when they're speaking basically for the normal, the thing you heard one of them hollering was ceasefire. The only way you're going to have a ceasefire is to release the hostages. If you want to have a released hostage, you'll have a ceasefire, then there's no way you're going to negotiate that without that. And the other thing is, and I've tried to tell them, I says, if I'd asked that young person, do you believe Hamas is a terrorist organization? They won't answer the question. Terrorist organizations, a terrorist group, will use their citizens and their innocent citizens to basically protect their war efforts. Civilized countries that go to war with differences will protect their people with their war efforts. It's a reversal. And that's a very difficult thing. That's why you have to eliminate terrorists anywhere you can, any way you can, because it's not going to go away.
Do you have another question? Where is Sarah?
But civility basically comes because you'll demand it.
Hi, Doug Smith. Listening to you, thank you. You basically, sounds like the system is set up, and then I think that everybody that's interested in watches a lot of politics on TV, and media is set up that way. Is there a way that we can get back? Is there any chance that somebody like you could run again and win?
Well, it won't be me, but I'm looking for that person. I'm going to be trying to give them a vehicle and give them protection. We have my daughter and I, Heather, where's Heather? Right there. We have a group called Americans Together because we're trying to show them that we are more together than you think. And if Americans Together can give you a venue and protection and some financial support to be able to run, if we can change the primary process and go into what we call ranked choice voting or majority voting, if we can put term limits on politicians, and if we can do that and go through a system that gives you more control in the middle, no one can get elected unless you all vote for them. The extreme left and extreme right can't get elected without the middle. They can't. They take you for granted. You got nowhere else to go. And you don't want to sit out, you know, your civic duty is to go vote. I've voted and I'll end up voting, you know, and I have my own theory. I've worked with all the people involved, so I have a little better insight. And with that, I've told Joe Biden, I think he's gone too far to the left. And with Donald Trump, I could not support that type of a government that was basically told me what they're going to do, using revenge as a tool of how they want to govern. You can't do that. So people should make up their own mind. I'll respect it, but one thing about it, I believe in the orderly transfer of power. And you can't have anybody running and being involved that basically the only fair election is the one I win, not you. The only rule of law pertains to you and not me. And I will weaponize the judiciary branch of our government to benefit me and have paybacks to my detractors. Yeah, doesn't work that way. So we're trying. We're going to try.
One more question maybe from over here, this gentleman here, and then we'll wrap it up with another question.
How are we doing on time?
Sarah, do we have
We can have a few if you want to, unless you are, unless
guy
you're
right
ready to
here.
go.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Manchin, Senator Manchin.
I'm Joe.
Okay. My name's Frank Baker. I'm a former city councilor. This was my district. Welcome to Dorchester. I experienced in the city council at a local level what we saw here. Every council meeting for the last year and a half, what a very, very difficult part of the reason why I left. My question would be, I love America Together. I love what you're doing, but do you have an appetite to boil it down to more of a local races? Because that's where I see we need to build that foundation so we can, as the city of Boston, as a citizen of Dorchester, like we need to build here before we're even thinking about who we have for Senate, who we have a president.
It's exactly what we're trying to do, basically to give people, whether in city council or any other, John right there, John will give you his card, how we can help. We're trying to do everything that we can to give you the cover you need, give you the expertise you need, how we can do different referendums and things of that sort. People have to take charge, that's all. They have to want to be involved. Don't let them run you off. And I've said this, what we saw a little bit of this, it's uneasy, it's uncomfortable. And my children, when I started being involved in politics, I told Heather when she was young, there are going to be a lot of people saying a lot of nasty things coming after you because they don't want you involved. They're afraid you might win. They don't want you involved. And I said, honey, let me just tell you, all the criticism you think we're taking, that's a small price to pay for the great country we live in and the democracy that we live in and the opportunities we have. So find the right person. The whole thing, this system doesn't work unless you give us the right product to work with. That product is basically the quality of a candidate you put forward. Who do you want to represent you? Do they have your values? Are they tempered well enough? Can they take a little self-criticism? Can they handle it in a civil way and be able, to move forward and hold everybody accountable?
Thank you. I want to end with a story that you were telling me backstage. You have distinct memories of the Kennedys, particularly the famous 1960 West Virginia primary. Can you illuminate on that?
I can tell you some stories, and I don't know if I should tell these stories. In 1960, I was 13 years old, and I remember my family. In West Virginia, the Kennedys chose West Virginia because it was the least Catholic state in the nation. Now, here I am in a Catholic family, ethnic family. My my father's full Italian, my mother's full Czechoslovakian, and everybody in these little coal camps all come from different parts of the world because they were good workers. And my grandfather had a little grocery store, my dad had a little furniture store, so we were into it. And I never saw my family get this excited. They'd always participated, and they always told me that I had to do something, give something back. Every day, and my grandmother took care of Mama Kay, affectionately known as Mama Kay. She took care of everybody coming, and she thought everyone should have a roof over their head, clothing on their back, and food in their stomach. That's all she cared about. Other than that, she figured you could make it. She'd get you started. And we lived by the, I told people I was a privileged child. And as a privileged child, they think, well, you must live in a big fancy neighborhood. I lived between the railroad tracks and the creek. Must have been a big fancy house, 3-room garage apartment. Okay, so why did I think I was privileged? I had unconditional love. There wasn't a day in my life that I knew that someone in my family didn't love me for all of my wrongs and all of my mistakes. They were with me. My grandfather would say, when I got in trouble, I'd say, hey, Pop. We called him Papa. I say, Pop, you with me? He says, honey, I'll be behind you until your chest hurts. You don't get much closer than that. So I had all this, and I kept thinking of this and everything. So here comes the Kennedys. And I'm thinking, what's going on? My dad's excited. Now, and of course, the Kennedys, they were just unbelievable strategists. And they were going to get all the prominent Catholic families first, because that was an easy picking, right? And then they were going to branch out from there. So my Uncle Jimmy was the greatest orator I've ever heard was my uncle. And John Kennedy, President John, they called him Jack, he said, and they took my uncle very quickly when they got in West Virginia, and they said, we want this guy here. And he was teaching.
People don't know his uncle is a legend. I covered him.
He's really a legend. And he's in a lot of the Kennedy books, and the Kennedys loved him, and Teddy and him were very close. So Jack Kennedy would say, now, Brother Jimmy, that was my uncle, I'm having you have one task. That's to teach my little brother Teddy there how to speak like you. That's all Jack ever told my Uncle Jim. But one of the funny things, so Uncle Jimmy was campaigning with them, and he didn't know these people. He says he has a rich Boston family and this and that, and Uncle Jimmy didn't have 2 nickels rubbed together. But he loved the political process, and he loved to be involved. So he would take them around and say, we need to go to this community, and they were up in the mountains in Elkins. And Uncle Jimmy said they were at a hotel one night, and they all got up in the morning, they were walking out, and the Kennedys didn't pay for anything. And the guy grabbed Uncle Jimmy and says, hey, Mr. Manchin, they didn't pay. He said, what? He said, they didn't pay. He says, you have to pay. Uncle Jimmy said, no, wait a minute. You want me to pay? I'm with 3 Kennedys, and I got to pay? He went over and he told Jack, President Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, he said, Senator, he said, listen, he says, you know what? He said, I really like you all, and I really want to support you. I got no money at all. If you want me to help you, you're going to have to pay. I can't pay. And Jack started laughing, so he says, Bobby, just go pay the damn bill, would you? Just go pay the bill, Bobby. So Uncle Jimmy tells us all those stories. I'm going to tell you one that's a little off, but there's a book out, so it's common knowledge. There's a book out called Just Good Old Politics by Raymond Chafin. Raymond Chafin was called Catfish in West Virginia, in southern West Virginia. He was a political operative. And Raymond Chafin was really just a character. And he was still involved when I ran. He was still a big political boss. And he was for Hubert Humphrey. And they were in the Aracoma Hotel in Logan, West Virginia. And he writes, this is in his book. And he writes, and he said, I said, Catfish, tell me some stories. Oh, he said, Joe, they were unbelievable. He says, you couldn't help but love these guys. He said, we all liked him. We had breakfast every morning. And every morning I'd tell them how great Hubert Humphreys was, and they would tell me how great their brother Jack was, and I should be really helping their brother Jack. And I said, guys, Hubert's my guy, okay? Humphrey's my guy, I'm with him. He says, one Friday morning, Bobby Kennedy and Raymond or Catfish was having breakfast, and Bobby says, hypothetically speaking, Catfish, how much would it take for you to be for my brother? Just hypothetically. And he says, now he says, you know I'm for Hubert. He says, we're talking hypothetically. He says, well, hypothetically could take about 35. 35. He said, okay. He said, no. He said, Joe, I never thought another thing of it. That was Friday. Monday morning, I had a sack thrown at me. And he said, there was 35,000 in it. He says, I meant 3,500, but we didn't waste a penny of it. Not one penny did we waste. Now, whether that's true or not, but that's the way Catfish told the stories. The thing about the Kennedys, they organized. They changed politics in West Virginia forever. They knew how, they were doing analogs and this and that and everything else when no one knew what they were doing. Demographics, they knew where to go, who to speak to, who to have speak for them. They just did it completely different. It was a science. They brought science to the political arena. And then they never forgot about West Virginia. We'd have never had an interstate without the Kennedys. But, you know, I-79 would not have come through our state. Jack Kennedy made that happen. We'd never had the Appalachian Regional Commission. He wanted it to happen. Because of the road system, we couldn't connect. And now we've taken that. My wife now, she's the first West Virginian ever to be ahead of the Appalachian Regional Commission that John Kennedy started and Lyndon Johnson put into law in '65. And now we're communicating internet. Remember this, 20% of the population in America lives in rural America, 60 million people. And I didn't know this until I became in the Senate, the way the money's distributed. 60 million people, 20% is in what we call rural America, rural West Virginia, rural whatever, any part of the rural. Only about 8% of the money was going into the rural areas, and that's why the divide, the country was divided. So I said, don't you think at least 20% of federal dollars when we divide them, whether it's education, healthcare, whatever, should at least be proportionally shared? And we started doing that now more, and we're able to get them up to speed. But guys, I'm just afraid that there are people that want us to be the divided states of America, and we're not. We are not. Don't let that happen. I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. They said, what side are you on? I said, there's only one side, the American side. I might have a D, you might have an R, we might have differences, but we should be able to move down the same path for one government, one country. And we're still the greatest country on earth.
Well, Senator, thank you for coming to Boston. Thank you for coming to the Institute. I'm going to hand it off to Adam, and we'll take up.
Way out. Thank you, Senator, so much. Give them another round of applause. Thank you both for your time. I hope you found that a valuable conversation. And keep your eyes open. We're going to be announcing our lineup for the rest of the spring and the summer very soon, and we look forward to having you back. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us in person. Have a great weekend.